the world of science, tech and math, we rise together on this perfect path. Ooh. Let's ride the waves, and united we stand, side by side, creating inclusion land. With courage our compass, and knowledge as our sail, we navigate challenges, and together prevail. Waves of change, they come crashing in. It's where it starts, where it begins. In the world of science, tech and math, we rise together on this perfect path. Ooh. She's got a mind that's sharp as a knife, breaking barriers every day of her life. In a field where she's often the only one, her determination can be undone. Women of color in STEM, breaking down doors, breaking stereotypes, and so much more. Their contributions to science and tech will inspire generations to come. You bet. From coding to chemistry, they paved the way. A brighter future every single day. They're brilliant, they're strong, and endlessly bold. An inspiration for the young and the old. Women of color in STEM, breaking down doors, breaking stereotypes, and so much more. Their contributions to science and tech will inspire generations to come. You bet. Innovators and trailblazers aren't afraid to speak. Their stories of success are the ones we need to seek. Their brilliance and talent can't be denied. Women of color in STEM, we stand by your side.
Hi, everyone. So you've made it. Last session of the day for most of you, yeah? Yeah? Are you worn out? No? Are you energized? Yeah, awesome. So we're gonna do an interesting session today. So we're gonna talk about mastering difficult conversations, which is something that we all due to varying degrees of success in all parts of our lives, whether we're talking to a spouse or a significant other, a partner, a parent, a kid, one of your children, a colleague, coworker. You're dealing with difficult conversations all the time. So we're not going to just focus on difficult conversations around work, although we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to use some examples in that vein. But we're going to talk about kind of the psychology around difficult conversations. We're going to talk about techniques for preparing for those conversations. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going through people's heads when these conversations are happening. So how many here have had to let somebody go, either from a job or from their position at work or anything like that? Yeah? Just a couple, yeah, a couple of people, yeah. That's a really difficult conversation. I've had to do it myself. I don't like doing it. I always want to be gentle when I do it, but that's a really, how many people have had to break up with somebody? You fired a boyfriend. Yeah, so have I, girl. Several of them, actually, over the years. So, so that's a difficult conversation. When we talk about difficult conversations, we often don't really talk about stress being on both sides of the conversation, right? So you as a manager having to have a performance review with an employee might be a difficult conversation. You having to let somebody go is a difficult conversation. You know, however we do it, whatever we're doing, obviously you didn't want to be really ugly to the boyfriend, although I have been. You want these conversations not to blow up and be like, Hurricane Helene blowing through your life, So we're going to talk about some techniques to keep that from happening, to keep it on a professional. How many of you had to have a difficult conversation with a client? Yeah, those can be really tricky to navigate. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the structure of that relationship plays into the way difficult conversations are managed. Because I often have to have difficult conversations with clients who are not doing what they said they were going to do and are delaying projects or, making a mess out of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, we're going to start with, because these difficult conversations have a lot to do with perception, we're going to start with a perception exercise. So how many people were in my session yesterday? Anybody? Okay. Well, don't tell what happened. Everybody stand up. So this is a technique or an exercise to kind of help you get in your head the idea of perception. I like to do when I teach or when I talk about things like this that are kind of nebulous, so to speak. I like to do something founded in movement and thinking and activity to kind of get us thinking about what we're going to be using later on in the presentation. So I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute. And I want you, without looking at your watch, nobody count in your head, no counting in your head. We're going to set a timer for 1 minute. And when you think it's been a minute, I want you to sit down. Okay? And I'm going to start. Give me a minute. Here we go. I can't even see what I'm doing. Can't see with them on, can't see with them off. Okay. So when you think we've hit a minute, sit down. Don't count in your head. When you feel in your body, when you perceive that we've hit a minute, sit down. So while we're doing this, so that you can't count in your head, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more, keep you distracted so you're not on the money. This type of process learning how to deal with difficult conversations is going to help you in a lot of different ways. Obviously, in your interpersonal relationships. It's going to help you a lot in your professional relationships because you're, throughout your career, are always going to be dealing with difficult conversations. How many people want to move into a management position? How many people want to eventually get to that point? Yeah, excellent. You're going to have a lot of these conversations. You're going to have these conversations moving up the ladder. So difficult conversations that you have moving up and difficult conversations that you have moving down. So difficult conversations you have with your peers, difficult conversations, okay, good. Difficult conversations you have with people who are below you in the organizational chart. Okay? So we're going to talk a lot about, very good. So interestingly, most of you got it right at a minute. Some of you were a little bit long, but I want to ask you this question, and be honest and raise your hand. How many of you sat down because somebody around you sat down? There you go. There you go. I applaud you because you did not. You were the last one standing. Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Very good. Our perception of what's going on is our perception. Your perception may be different from mine, but we are also influenced by other people around us. So think about that as we kind of go through this presentation about how perception rolls into what we're talking about when we're discussing difficult conversations. What are the dynamics? What's going on with a difficult conversation? So there's a lot of emotion going on, a lot of feelings going on. Here are some of the things that pop up in difficult conversations. If I am having a conversation with an employee and I'm saying you're not meeting the criteria for performance, what up on the list here are you think we're going to be dealing with that particular employee in that conversation? What are some of the dynamics that I have to be aware of if I come to you and I say, you know what, that project that you turned in on Monday, you didn't cut it. You missed what I told you. The data was weak. The writing was horrible. You know, how are they feeling when I have that conversation with them? Just shout it out. Just tell me what you... Embarrassment? Yeah. Shock? Could be shock. Although if you're a good manager, it shouldn't be shock. You know, they should just be... Frustration? That's a really, really good one. It could be anger. It could be indifference if you've got someone on your team who's kind of like, yeah, well, you know, I didn't have enough time. I don't care. You know? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You look at it and you go, oh, I thought this was excellent. You know I've done that. I remember in school turning in a paper and I thought, oh, let me tell you, this is the .com bomb. This is like the best paper. I got a C. I was in shock. I was like, how did I get a C on this? You know? So a lot of different things rolling around, not only in the person you're having the conversation with, but how many of these particular dynamics are going on in your head?
I mean, I think, so for example, I just had my annual performance review on Monday, so I think stress,
You're having it on Monday when you get back?
I had it on.
Had it last Monday, okay. So stress, yeah?
Stress can go into like anticipation of those conversations.
Uh-huh.
Also, sometimes when you're like reflecting on yourself, you could have like some embarrassment from things that maybe you already know you didn't perform well at, or indifference about things that you could feel are coming. So I think, you know, it could be a little bit of all of that.
Yeah, all those feelings. How many people here have kids? Yeah. When you are having a conversation, a difficult conversation with your child, and I have 2 daughters and 2 grandsons, so I am in constant difficult conversations. How many of you think about this when you're having a chat with the kiddo? Yeah. You try most of the time, yeah, to kind of like get it in your head what's going on with them when you're having that particular conversation. My 16-year-old grandson, we have a rule for him. And that rule is you have to do some type of after-school activity, and we don't care what it is. So either join a team of some kind, you do a club after school or something, because you are not coming home after school, going in your bedroom and getting on the computer for the rest of the night, you know? So that's the rule. That's the rule. And it is a constant after school push, because he, for some strange reason, decided he was going to go join the swim club, the swim team. And I'm like, go for it, because his older brother was a swimmer. But it's a constant, never-ending, get your suit, get in the car, get to practice, you know, and I can get aggravated, frustrated, stressed, angry with him, just constantly having that conversation with that child. And there are days when I just don't want to have that conversation with him. But that's a difficult conversation that I'm having on the personal. So these dynamics are one of the things that you need to have in your head going into that conversation. What is the other person going to be feeling in this difficult conversation? And how are you feeling going into this conversation? Because that's just as important. I know, because I've got a temper, I know that if I'm mad when I'm having that conversation, I'm probably going to pop off and be a lot more severe or irritated than I need to be. You know, so if somebody turns something into me and I look at it and I go, all right, we're already late, and you know, I needed to get this project kicked off, and now you turn this in, and it looks like, you know, a 14-year-old did it on their lunch break. You know, I'm irritated. I take a breath for a minute, and I don't let that come into the difficult conversation I'm going to have about that wasn't what I wanted, you know. All right. So difficult dynamics, not only for the person that you're talking to, but also be aware of those as your own dynamics. All right. The other thing to consider are the power dynamics in the relationship, right? So power dynamics can be two-sided. They can be the power dynamics of you as a manager or a partner, or you know, or it can be the power dynamics of the other person in the difficult conversation. So let's take a couple examples. Let's talk about the power dynamics of me as a project manager having a conversation with a client who is not following the plan on the project to get it done. So if we walk through this, in that particular situation, I'm having the difficult conversation with the client. Who has the control over the situation? First thing I think in my head, who has the control? So in that particular conversation dynamic, who's got the control of the board, so to speak? Client. Because I need to get that project done. They're kind of holding all the cards on that project, right? So first thing in my head as I start with this difficult conversation is, all right, who has the dynamic of control here? All right, risk to my position or perception of me. Who has the control, or where's the dynamic fit there? Is it with me or is it with my client? Very good. It's both. It's both. And depending on how I have that conversation with the client, there is some risk to me to get my project done because my boss is expecting me to get my project done. But there's also some risk to that client. I'm going to give you a kind of a concrete example of how this went down with one of my clients in a minute. But I want to go through this first. So for both of us, risk for both of us. Where's the privilege? So privilege has a couple of different meanings in the workplace sometimes. Let's talk about what privilege means here. So privilege here means it's really talking about what out of the two parties, who assumes that they have more control and authority over, whether or not they do or not. But where where in the heads of the people in this conversation, who is assuming that, oh, well, obviously I'm the one that controls what's going on here. I'm the owner of this. That's what I mean by privilege. So in the conversation that I'm having with a client, where does the privilege lie? With the client. With the client. Yeah, and I'll explain in my example in a minute where that privilege came into. And then where does the authority lie? Both areas, exactly. So authority on both sides. So let's talk about the example that I had very recently with a client. I had a client that agreed to start a project with the company I was working for. We tried to kick the project off about 6 times. And every time we would try to kick it off, they go, yeah, we're ready to start. We've got a team assigned. Here we go. And I say, okay, we're going to kick off on Thursday, hour-long meeting. This is what we're going to do. And then they would cancel. And I would go, okay, well, let's get this realigned and let's do it again. And they would cancel again. We even had one where we had everything set up. Some of the people showed up, but the project manager didn't show up, so we didn't get anywhere, And it just went on and on and on like that. And of course, I'm getting pressure from my boss. Is like, hey, this project has been lagging and it's delayed, and why isn't this happening, and what's going on? So I had to go back and have a very difficult conversation with that client. And I'll tell you how I managed that conversation based on these power dynamics. So obviously, the client had the control over what was going to happen because they were the ones that were going to put their people on the team. My people were all ready to go. They were the ones that were going to control getting their team assigned and getting the project kicked off, right? So they really were in control of me getting this done. But it came to risk. I used that particular point to push them a little bit. And the way I used that to push them, I said, hey, listen, I understand that you guys have had a hard time getting this kicked off and everything moving. I totally understand if you can't do this. That's fine. If you guys aren't going to get on this project and you don't want it to happen, that's perfectly fine. I probably can pull my project team back, put them on another project. I will just go ahead and let all of the users who are expecting this know that we're not doing this project. So what did I do there? I asserted authority, but look at that risk point. So I used the risk point to generate my strategy for this particular conversation. So I put him at risk for his position. I mean, he obviously wasn't going to get fired, but his perception. So his perception, when his users started asking, hey, we thought this project was kicked off 6 weeks ago and was going to be ready for us in 2 weeks. We're now finding out that they're not going to do it at all, that they're pulling out, that you haven't gotten anything started. I use that as my leverage in that difficult conversation to give him a little. I was nice about it. Now, the risk could have been that he would have gone, yeah, that sounds good to me. So I had to be careful with that. But thinking through how I was having this conversation with him, I used that risk point to put a little push on, for him. Privilege. How did I use privilege in that conversation? And I'll give you a hint. It's tied to what I did with risk. My connection to the users, exactly. One of my users, one of the people that were users for that particular technology, was a very high-ranking person in that organization. So going to that and saying to that particular person, I don't think we're going to get this kicked off. I know that you are high-ranking in this organization and that you assume a lot of privilege from that. I didn't say that, but that's my concept behind what I'm saying to him. We're just not going to be able to get it done. I don't understand what's going on with that team. We've had 3 attempts at kickoffs. And then how did I use authority there? Right. I can pull my people off. Right. And if I pull my people off, it may be a couple of months before I can get another team assigned. So using that model, that power dynamics model, to think through my conversation with this particular client, how do you think I did? What's your guess about how I did? They kicked off Friday. They kicked off Friday. Yeah. All of a sudden it was like, oh, we have to get this started Friday. And I go, well, no, I'm not even home, but they kicked off Friday. So the going into that conversation without planning it and thinking it through and thinking about who has control, where the risk fits, who has the privilege in the organization, how can I use that privilege, where does the authority fit, is there authority in the organization? Using that kind of put in my head how I needed to have this difficult conversation with this client. Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah? Let's try it a different way. So what if I am going to have a conversation, let's say I am having a conversation with an employee that I'm going to terminate today. So let's go through the whole thing with an employee that I have to terminate. And this is going to be a much different model, because in this particular model, it's what? It's all one-sided, right? Who has the control over? Yeah. Risk to me, perception of me, or risk to my position. Is there any risk there to me? Not if I've done the job correctly, right? Not if I've documented performance and moved them through the appropriate HR process. No, there's no risk to me here to do this, right? What about privilege? I will say this one thing about privilege. I had to fire the son of our CEO one time in a company. I had to let the CEO's kid go. So you talk about privilege. You talk about being nervous. I was like, oh, damn. But I did go to him ahead of time. I went, I'm firing your kid today, so you may want to take him to lunch. So privilege that I may have in the relationship, of course, I have the privilege there, right? I'm in control of what's going on. And the authority, obviously, I have the authority. Even though it's all one-sided here, I still have to think through this process, because you don't want to destroy someone on the way out the door, right? That's not the point. That's not the purpose. You want to be gentle with what you do, but you want to be firm. And we're going to talk a little bit more too about how to actually deliver that message, how to think about and prepare yourself for that message. Anyone want to take a try? Anyone have a difficult conversation that they've had or they've got coming up they want to model with us? No? Everyone has not had a difficult conversation this week. Too many difficult conversations. Any questions about the dynamics? So that's a good model to use for thinking through the conversation, and that's the first thing that you want to do when you know you're about to have a difficult conversation is take a break, take a minute, walk through the model, and figure out. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, go to because they are recording you, and it's going to the CIA.
I won't say my name then.
Then don't say your name.
I was just, the slide before where you talked about dynamics of difficult conversations and how people can react. I was curious how you would navigate denial as one of those, and if somebody doesn't see why you're doing something and the reasons behind it, how you would navigate that, and that just makes the situation more difficult, but yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And people's reaction can be odd. People can have a very, how we started out with perception? People can have really strange perceptions, where you go in. I had an employee one time that was working in customer service, that I had to have several conversations with him about his performance. You know, I sit him down and go, all right, these are our performance criteria. This is what you have to do, you know, and counseled him and talked him through it and, you know, put him on a performance plan, met with him. And then finally, when it got to the point, I was like, this guy just doesn't have it. I mean, he wasn't a bad guy. This was not the job for him. And I had to bring him in my office and I go, you know what? I don't think this is working out for either one of us, you know? And he was in shock. He was like, are you serious? And I was like, am I serious about this not working out, or am I serious about you're not very good at this? Which do you want to know? Because I am very serious that this is not working out. But yeah, people, because of their perception, their perception of self a lot of times, they don't get it. They don't get that they're the problem, you know? And the way you deal with that is that as you go through, and we're going to talk a little bit about getting prepared for the conversation, you should know, in a lot of cases, you know, you should know when you go in, is this going to be one of these people who just really are not going to understand what I'm telling them? You know what I mean? And like personal relationships sometimes can be that way, you know, because there's a lot of emotion tied up in it, you know, and when you finally get to that point, you go, okay, this is not working out. You know, I think we need to see other people in possibly other countries, you know. That's how much it's not working out. And then you're going to end up with people who go, but I love you. You know, like, yeah, well, you may, but, you know. And, you know, so it's all about perception. And you're going to know a lot of times going in, you know, I often know when I am having a conversation with a client where I'm having problems, or if I'm pitching a deal to someone, I often know and prepare before I start that conversation. I kind of look at it and go, how well do I know this person, and what are they looking for? How are they going to take this information that I'm going to give them? You know, are they going to be angry about it and blow up? Are they a volcano type person? Or are they going to be calm about it? Or are they going to look at it and go, well, why in the world not? You know, type thing. Does that make sense? All right, this is the desk model. How many people have seen this model for communication? Anybody? I like this model a lot. And it really helps when you're preparing, and you hear me over and over again, preparing, right? You never go into a difficult conversation where you don't feel that you're prepared, that you're ready for the conversation, right? And ready for the conversation doesn't necessarily mean you don't want to have it, right? Ready for the conversation means you've thought through the process, you've prepared what you're going to say, and that you can approach the conversation in a manner that's not going to have it just fly off a cliff type thing, right? So, first step, describe the situation objectively and note both sides. So conversations, like we said, perception, everyone has an opinion about what's going on. Everyone has their perception of what's going on in either a business relationship or personal relationship, client, business relationship. Everyone has kind of like their own idea about what's going on in that particular relationship, right? It is important when you're starting that difficult conversation that you start the conversation by describing the situation and describe it evenly on both sides, right? So in my example where I was letting that guy in customer service go, you know, I said, you know, John, I really think this is not working out for either one of us, right? And I described why it wasn't working out for us, what the situation was for the company. You haven't picked up the technology yet. You're unable to answer the questions for clients. You know, we've had several releases that you're behind on and you can't support in the field. My side of the situation. And I understand that in this company, we release software quickly. and that to keep up with all of the releases we have is difficult, and that may not be your forte, right? Describe the situation objectively. That was my objective view of why he was not working out in the organization. It was just too fast-paced for him, and he just wasn't able to keep up with what we were doing. Express how you feel, if it's appropriate in the situation. And I always feel when you're having a difficult conversation, because I'm a touchy-feely kind of dude anyway, when you're having a difficult conversation, even if it's not necessarily in a personal relationship, but for my conversation with John, I told him, I really like you as a person, and I did. I thought he was great. You have a great relationship and ability to interact with our clients, and I really hate that this is where what we have to do. This is not something that I want to have happen, So express how you feel. Specify the behaviors or outcomes you would like to see. That is the difficult conversation I had with him previously, but in the point that I am asking him to leave the company, I'm saying, we would like you to finish up, today, and then we'll be paying you for the next 2 weeks type thing. What is it that I need to be done? Very, very clear. And then, in this particular case, there were no consequences because he was going to be out the door. But if you were dealing with a different type of conversation, you might want to specify the consequences, that if we don't get this going or if this doesn't get changed, these are the consequences. Does that make sense? How many of you use this intuitively, like with your kids? Yeah? I use it all the time, When White Kelly says, it's raining, I don't want to go to swim practice. Okay? That doesn't make any sense. So even though it is raining, it's not lightning, and you're going to swim practice, And how I feel that you're delaying and you're wasting my time right now because I need to get you to swim practice and get back to work, So that's how I feel right now. Specify the behavior. Go get your suit and meet me in the car in 5 minutes so that we can get out of here. And specify the consequences. I will not feed you ever again. You will starve. You will be a little orphan on the street. People will look at you and feel bad for you. That's your consequence. That's going to be your consequence. So the desk model really, in kind of helping you prepare that conversation. How many of you use this model like in an interpersonal relationship, maybe like with someone you're breaking up with? Yeah. And we kind of intuitively do that when we're breaking up with people, right? It's not you, it's me. Type thing. Yes, ma'am. Come right up here to this microphone.
Myself. My name is Shuang Xi. I'm from Abbott. So my question is, I like the dynamic, the power dynamic and this desk model, but my question is, how do we frame or phrase our words to make it not sound like a threat? Or is it okay to sound like a threat in this case, especially when you are telling the other person, here's the risk, right? Here is the privilege and authority I have and the consequence, right? What's the strategy to make it sound a conversation instead of a one-way threat?
I think it could come across as a threat, and I think threat is maybe kind of an extreme term. I would never want to threaten someone, but certainly somebody could perceive that, depending on how I phrase it. But I think explaining consequences clearly by saying, let's say we're dealing with someone that we're having a performance review on. You would want to say in the performance review, if we can't get your work up to this level within the next 4 weeks, the next thing that we would have to talk about is termination.
Sure.
Notice a couple of things that I did there. If we right? So it's a
so
partnership.
you are part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a partnership. If we can't get your performance up in the next 4 weeks,
Yeah.
we're going to have to think about termination,
Sure.
you know?
Okay.
So don't make it, I would not phrase it by saying, if you're not performing in these points in 4 weeks, I'm going to do a referral to HR to get you out of here. That's a threat.
So even though the risk is really on their end, but you still use the words way to make them
Yeah.
feel that you are part of the
Yeah,
journey.
because you want them to feel that way. I had an employee one time. I was COO for a software company out in Silicon Valley, and I had an employee that I promoted into a position, a management position, his first management position. And he wanted to be promoted to an employee, but as a manager, he kind of got it in his head that being a manager meant that he didn't have to do any of the work, that he would sit in his cubby and everyone would come to him and he would just simply answer questions and point people in directions and he would be kind of hanging out. And I said, well, maybe I didn't explain that to you correctly, because that's certainly not the case. You know, that's not how this is going to go. So I brought him back into the office and we had another conversation. I go, well, you're a working manager, which means, you know, I don't expect you to take as many projects as the other engineers, but I expect you to have some projects, you know. And it kind of continued that this was not working out the way that we had talked about it working out. And so I finally brought him back in and I told him, here's my perception of this. My perception is you don't really want to do this. And then I just stopped and let him
Defend himself.
work through that.
Sure.
Yeah. I wasn't threatening him. I'm just like, hey, my perception is this is not your thing. You don't want to do this. Even, and you know, the subtext was, even though you pestered me for 9 months to be a manager, you know.
Okay.
So it's all about the delivery of
Sure.
that difficult information, right?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anybody else question on desk, the desk model? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Michelle from U Chicago. So if you are in a situation where you're dealing with a really difficult employer, where it's kind of like you need to be in this position for a certain amount of time to move up, and you're trying to like work through certain conversations, but the maturity level is not equal, you know, what do you recommend doing for like actionable steps to hopefully see progress?
So are we talking about you are dealing with a manager that
Yes.
you report to who has got a maturity problem and you're like, I got to be here for
Yeah, a certain
another
amount of time, or
6 months before I can jump to the next.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. There are a couple of ways that you could approach this, and that really has a lot to do with your relationship with that manager. I mean, obviously, one of the ways you could be is like, yeah, I'm just gonna march in place. You know what I mean? I'm gonna get my time in, realize that this guy is I just got to get around him to get to the next point. You know, and you're gonna, through your career, you're gonna run into a lot of that. You know, you look at it and I go, well, I'm not gonna learn anything from you, you know, and I just need to, you know, make a detour around and get to the next point. If you think that particular person is someone that could have an insightful conversation with you, then you could use this model and sit down with them. And we're going to talk in a minute about the environment that you need to be in. But I would think, just based on what you're saying, is that one of the things you want to be aware of is that when you have this conversation, that you're having it in a way that you have his attention. You know, you obviously don't want to make this person feel threatened.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that's
But
the part that's difficult.
yeah, but I think using that model to be able to sit down, if you think it's going to be useful, using that model to say, okay, here are the issues I'm having. and describe them, both ways. Sometimes I don't understand exactly what you're asking me to do. That's on me, but I could also ask you to be a little clearer, in my assignments, because I think maybe sometimes I don't turn in what you're looking for because I don't totally understand what you're asking me for. How that makes you feel. I really like being here in the department. I'm enjoying my position here. I want to stay here and do this. This is a great opportunity. I want to make it better, so express how you're feeling. Specify the behavior or outcomes. Could we work on maybe being more detailed in what you're asking me to do? Or could we meet more frequently? Could we maybe have a 30-minute each week where we go through outstanding things for me to make sure, and I'm just assuming that, and then specify the consequences. I don't believe I'd specify a consequence.
Okay.
I think I'd stop
Yeah.
at behavior. I don't think I'd go in and don't make me cut you, even though you might be thinking about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you could use that model just to even structure a conversation like that, but with the awareness in your head that the other person you're having a conversation with has to have enough going on that they can pick up what you're putting down.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
But that's I hear that a lot. This is my third year being here at the Women of Color Conference, and I hear that a lot from women who come to me and say, how do I deal with this guy that, I'm reporting to that just simply doesn't have it, And my comment is to them is a lot of times, if you're not learning something from the guy that you're working for, exit, move around them.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. It's what I've done
Yeah.
in my career when I've worked in companies and we've been acquired a couple of times. And I always, when I start working for a new manager, my first thing is to assess them as much as they assess me and look at it and go, maybe I'm going to learn something here and this is going to be a great opportunity, or maybe this is going to be a big giant waste of my time and I need to start looking now. And you can pretty much assess it fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but don't mess with your career by staying someplace where you're not going to be able to, where you're not going to get promoted, or you feel that you're not gaining something from that position. Don't march in place for long. Yeah. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Okay. Consider the outcomes. So this one is always really, really interesting. So when we start talking about outcomes for difficult conversations, these are kind of the 4 outcomes that we see whenever we have a difficult conversation. One of them is I win, you lose. And the perception is the best outcome is for me, right? So if I fire someone, I win, you lose. And that's pretty much always going to be the perception in that one. If I'm having a conversation where I'm putting someone on a performance plan, something like that, being put on a performance plan, being told your work is not up to par, and here are the things that you need to do if you want to continue to work in this organization. That's their perception. I win, you lose in that. Even though I'm trying to help you get there, their perception is also going to be, you win, I lose. Perception, best outcome for you. We see that a lot in sales positions. How many people here have recently, well, let me ask you this question. That you win, I lose is something that you hear a lot in a particular type of sales that goes on in this country. What do you think it is? What is it? Somebody said it. Cars. Absolutely. Absolutely, cars. My dad was an incredible, he was a nuclear engineer, is MIT educated. I say that I also went to MIT because I went to MIT day camp. And Dad always thought that was so funny. He actually, for Christmas one year, gave me an MIT alum t-shirt that I could wear around. But my dad was as close to Mr. Rogers as you possibly could get. He looked like Mr. Rogers. He dressed like Mr. Rogers. Everyone in the neighborhood said, yeah, your dad is like Mr. Rogers. He never yelled at us. He never spanked us. Dad was so gentle until he was going to buy a car. And then that man was unrecognizable. I would be with him going, who the hell are you? He was scary. He was going to beat that salesman. So, but the salespeople, you know, oh yeah, well you got the best deal. Yeah, I'm probably not going to be able to send my children to college now. We're probably going to be living in that old car I have, you know. You win, I lose. Sometimes strategically that may not be a bad outcome for you as a manager or as someone negotiating a deal. You win, I lose. You know, that can be effective. You have to have a little insight in your own head. We talked a little bit about outcomes yesterday in another session, and someone who was in the session says, yeah, but I'm just so competitive. I want to win. I just want to win. I want to be the winner. All the time I want to be the winner. And I get it because I'm exactly the same way. But sometimes you win, I lose is you winning. You know? So think about it when you're like walking through that process. Think about it as, yeah, I actually won because you did what it was I needed you to do, even though you perceive that you're the winner. We both win. Always going to be the best scenario, but you're also going to be dealing with people, and we talk about authority. We're dealing with the people who want to win all the time. You know, I deal with a lot of high-profile physicians, heads of departments and things like that. They always win. That's what is in their head. I always win. I am the dude. I run the department. What I say goes. And it just is me out there going, okay, yeah, that will work. And what if we also did, you know, things like that. So in that, we both win is really, from my perception, is that we both win. I got what I needed. You got what you needed, even though your perception is, you know, you're the dude. You can be the dude. Or we both lose. And in the situation I was telling you about that project that actually got kicked off Friday, if I were to pull out of that project and he was to say, well, that's fine, we didn't want to do it to begin, we both lost, right? But as you go through this, perception outcomes about who is actually the winner is only the perception of that outcome. It's not necessarily the outcome, right? So even in the case of you win, I lose, we both win, and we both lose, those are just the perceptions of how the deal went down or how the conversation went down, right? So I could have a conversation where I put someone on a performance plan, and if I do it well, we both win. You know, I'm going to invest in you to get your performance up to the next level. I want you to be successful here, and they're going to put in the effort to actually make that happen, right? We both win in that one, and that's the best outcome for both of us and for the company, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So consider the outcomes. So the practical approach. The one that I don't have up there that should be the first bullet point is to not have a difficult conversation when you are tired or you're angry. That's probably like ahead of anything else. You know, if you know you have to have a difficult conversation. I once broke up with a boyfriend at like 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday. That was dumb, you know? Have the conversation at a time when you're rested, you can think clearly, you're not emotional about what's going on, and you can have a conversation. It can be more of a conversation than, you know, a fit. But first thing, plan the conversation. So I've given you the tools, right? Giving you the tools of how to plan the conversation, how to think through the dynamics of the conversation, and I've told you the emotions that are going to be in that conversation, potential emotions. So your thing should be, if I'm going to have that conversation, what do I need to do to plan for that conversation? Who am I going to talk to? Where are we going to have the conversation? You know that thing about if you're going to break up with someone, break up in a really fancy, nice restaurant. It works. You know, so plan the conversation. Where are you going to have the conversation? Everyone needs to be rested for the conversation. Making sure, and you can even telegraph the conversation. So I always like to say an employee should never get put on a performance, should never be surprised that they get put on a performance plan, right? So you should be having these conversations with people along the way so that it's not a total and complete shock, that something happens. So that's part of your plan the conversation. We're not going to just jump into it cold and scream down the hall, "You're an idiot, get out." Although I've seen that work too. So plan the conversation. Who are you going to have the conversation with? When are you going to have it? Who's going to be rested? What are you going to say? You're going to go through that in your head, right? You're going to go through and get all of those points in your head for the conversation. So plan the conversation. Choose the right time to have the conversation. So, having a conversation about performance once an employee has really screwed up something big is probably not the right time for that conversation, right? There's a lot of emotions going on. There's a lot of irritation on your part. There's a lot of irritation on the employee part. Choose the right time to have that conversation. Okay, let's straighten out the mess, get things back on track, and then pull them in and have that conversation. So choose the right time or the right restaurant if that's going to be what you're doing. Be observant of the environment. We talked a minute ago about having a conversation with a manager, and I said, be aware of having a conversation when you both can stop and talk, So that, the environment may be in your manager's office or bringing someone to your office. The environment can be a more casual setting. A lot of times today, since we don't travel to be on site as much with clients, I know we don't on our projects, a lot of times those conversations are going to be on Teams, or on Zoom or something like that, Think about that environment when you're having that conversation. Are you on camera on that conversation? What's going on with that? So plan the environment. And then practice being calmly assertive. How many people know the technique of saying no and then just stopping? How many people feel that if you say no to somebody, you have to justify yourself? A lot of us do. A lot of us do. Yeah. It is a very, very, very powerful technique if you're telling somebody no, just simply to say no, and then don't say anything else. Right? Yes, ma'am. Would you go to the microphone? You don't have to give your name. They're listening.
Yeah, I do like that about the just saying no and letting it speak for itself. But I've also had backlash for it. It's like, oh, how rude, Yeah. It seems like, there are certain people who can, pull it off without like a certain perception. It's almost like for certain of us, it's like you have to like kind of kowtow and make it look like,
Yeah, no, I understand that. And so sometimes no and then not saying anything at all can also be done by saying no and then changing the subject to the next point, right? So I recently bought a car, which is, and I know this is weird, and I'll own it. I love buying cars. I love car shopping. I love car negotiating. I think when I retire, I'm going to have a consulting job where all I do is go out and buy cars for people. because I love it. I love it. Yes, ma'am. Call me. You'll be my first client. And I think a lot of it is because I do a lot of negotiation and I do a lot of work with difficult conversations and things like that. So I know what I'm doing when I go in there. But I'm tickled to hear other conversations going on in the dealership, you know, because I'll be sitting there waiting on them to do their whole thing about, oh, I got to take that to my manager and see if I'm like, yeah, okay. You know, you got 45 minutes and then I got a jet. I got an appointment, you know. So listening to the conversations where the guy goes, oh, by the way, there's seat protector already on the seat, so that's going to be an additional charge, you know. And I hear people going, but I didn't want that. Yeah, but it's already on the seats, so you got to have it, you know. And I'm like, okay, we'll take it off. Well, you can't get it off. I go, you'll figure it out, you know, just take it off. But, you know, a lot of times it's no, I don't want the seat protector. You can take that off. Now, let's talk about the next thing, you know. Let's talk about financing. And we're like, well, wait a minute. And I go, no, we're done with that. Let's talk about financing, you know. So sometimes it's not just no, although I love what I call a pregnant no. You know, which you go no, and then you don't say anything else, and then they fumble. It's a negotiation technique. If you're negotiating a contract, sometimes they'll say, you know, well, we're willing to pay $275,000. You go, okay, well, no. And then you don't say anything else. And then it puts it back on them to try to all of a sudden justify why they're only going to pay, and they start talking through it and winding themselves up, and you're just sitting there going, oh, you know, go at it, go ahead, you know. So either no or change the subject, or that pregnant no, which is no. What else do you have to say? You know, either one of those. Okay. Any questions on that? That practice being calmly assertive is a really, really hard thing to do. Because people can wind you up in these emotionally charged, difficult situations, you know, where you are feeling emotion, they are feeling emotion. You're in the middle of that conversation, and you get to that point where you have to say, this is the way it's going to be, and that's the end of the conversation. Here's the performance plan I'm going to put you on. Read through it. Do you have any questions? Okay, thanks for stopping by. Why don't you head back to your desk now and let me go on about my day, right? Calmly assertive. I'm not getting emotion involved. I'm not driving it in that direction. Calmly assertive. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's hard. That's a hard thing to do, is being calmly assertive. Any questions at all? Ooh, we're done a little. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Eileen Weathers. I sat in your earlier session, and it's just as informative as that. I'm here in Metro Detroit, so welcome all who are visiting. And I currently serve in a project management role supporting Google data centers, and I am a career pivoter from the automotive industry. My question is, I know we've talked about situations where it may be a little more adversarial, but can you share some examples or some advice when you are negotiating salary, whether you're seeking a job or you're in a position and you're seeking to elevate your your salary, particularly when it comes to pay parity, or whether you may believe that you are in line for something. Thank you.
It's a good, really, I love negotiating salaries. And I know I'm a weirdo, and I'll be the first to admit it, but I didn't used to be very good at it. When I was out of the military, I took a job in Los Angeles and did not do a very good job negotiating my salary, and was living like one step above poverty out there. I mean, I really struggled. And that taught me a very, very, very good lesson. And one of them was always understand the cost of living where you live, A, and then B, understand your own worth, and understand your worth compared to other people in your organization, but also your peers outside of your organization. So in salary negotiations, data is always going to be your best friend, you know? Look at, I mean, you can go to Glassdoor and find out what salaries have been reported in that. You should be able to, industry-wide, know what a project manager is getting for data center work and things like that. Always go into those conversations prepared, and then as you are talking about your salary and you're having that conversation with them, say, hey, I did some research. These are the comparable salaries for my position in other industry or in other companies that are in our particular industry, you know. Preparation for that is like critical, you know, to make sure that you get what, you know, what's on par for your particular position. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, come right over here.
I really liked your tip on saying no and taking a pause, and the other person fumbles and they're forced to rethink about what they're saying. Would you recommend to do this in professional settings as well? Let's say when maybe you disagree with your manager or you're talking to your peers. And why I say that, some context is I struggle with saying no. I like go into a huge explanation. It's also due to, I guess, being a woman of color in this space, and you're already like in uncharted territory and you want people to like you, but I don't necessarily want to work towards that. But there's this subconscious thinking because they've already not seen a female at this leadership position, and then it'll be worse for me if they don't like me. So yeah, I guess going back, like, would you recommend doing this in a professional setting, like saying no?
I think it depends. I think it depends on what the situation is. So if you're, you know, if somebody's asking you, you know, we're interested in doing, like, for example, you know, some of my engineers came to me and they said, hey, we want to build this AI app tool, because we're like interested in AI right now, you know, so we want a chance to get in and figure out how it works and all this kind of stuff. Well, the answer, because we're behind on so many other things, was no, you know. But I realized that if I just said, no, we're not doing that, and moved on, that would not have been a leadership
Right.
point for me, you know. So I had to say no, but I had to say no in a way, it's like, no, however, I agree that this is something we need to explore. So why don't we look at, in next quarter, putting some hours into the project to consider that? And then say nothing else. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, you know, it's not always just no, you know, but in some situations, just no is the answer, and there's nothing else to be said, especially if someone is being antagonistic about it. You know,
If it's like really unreasonable.
yeah, you know, if they're pushing, if you say no, we're not going to do that right now, and they're like, but, you know, no, and
Got it. Thank you.
yeah. But also realize, and you bring up like a really, 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 really good point about being a woman in the workplace, and a male-dominated, and in STEM and engineering and all that type of stuff, how you really want to become part of the team, you know, and you want to be accepted, and you want people to look at you as competent and as a good engineer. And I think that is all really important. But I think there's also a balance between that and, you know, because you want to be part of the team to be part of the group and to be able to participate in the group and that group dynamic thing. But I don't think you ever want to do that to the point that you ever put yourself down and don't consider yourself just as qualified as any of those other engineers. And if you're working for a manager who doesn't recognize that, you know, if your leadership doesn't recognize that, that's a red flag for you in leadership. And that's always critical to understand.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Donaldson. So I have a question in regards to, okay, we go through all these practical approaches, and sometimes it's like, okay, you use certain words, facial expressions, and still you can come off aggressive or it's not easily finessed. So do you have any recommendations in regards to having a smoother conversation with the other person?
Yeah, that's a really good point because, you have what you're saying, but you also have your body language, and, I've been in difficult conversations where I'm pretty sure people could tell I was irritated or I was mad or something like that. That's one of the reasons you always plan the conversation, choose the right time, and choose the right location. Because if you are in a situation where you're already irritated, then your body language is going to be out there. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it can be difficult to control, and it may be something that you don't necessarily know that you're doing.
Correct.
So I had a director that worked for me many, many years ago who could tell when we were in a group meeting if someone asked me a question that irritated me, because she was really observant and she was really, really good. And she said to me one day, she was also a good friend of mine. We had worked together, and I brought her to this company because she was incredible with logistics and project planning and things like that. And she said to me one day, she goes, I can always tell when one of the engineers asks you something that pisses you off. And I go, no, you can't. This is like stone face. You cannot tell that. She goes, yeah, you have a tell when you're irritated. And I go, okay, what is it? She goes, you put your glasses up on your forehead. And I went, no, I don't. But sometimes you do things that you don't necessarily realize that you do. And that's why being in a space that you're kind of like calm, you've got the time to do what you're doing, and that's not always going to be the case. You're going to always end up in situations where you have to kind of like jump in and deal with something, and it may not be the smoothest, but this is the goal that you should try. And then, I've had conversations where I've done the conversation in front of a mirror and looked at my face just to see, what do I look like? And I do a pretty good poker face, and you can tell unless I've got my glasses on my forehead, you can tell that, I'm pretty calm and cool and collected about it, even though inside I might be really irritated about it. So just watch it and be observant of your body language and where your glasses are.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? None? Okay. Well, last session, I hope, for most of you, and you're going to go home and get your gowns on and go to the big dinner or ball tonight and all that kind of stuff. That'll be exciting. I didn't bring a gown, so I won't be going. So, well, I thank you so much, and have a good rest of the evening.
The president's lifetime achievement is grand, marked by the contributions they planned, dedication to pushing the edge, positive changes they will always pledge. A life's work, it's profound and it's grand, a lasting impact with diversity's hand.